from your perspective, how would you describe Cartesi and how do you see Cartesi?
Yeah.
Okay, I think Cartesi is a company offering a layer 2 solution with a different spin. Instead of just focusing on building a better EVM or providing, improving upon Ethereum straight from what they had before, we are trying to build something else with actual Linux and have more common languages and frameworks that we used to have before blockchain, I guess.
I think like we chose what we wanted the developers to be able to do, and then we took all the technical decisions to allow for that experience, right?
Yeah.
So like you wanted the developers to be able to build CPU intensive computations. We wanted them to use like common libraries, right, without having to rebuild the wheel every time.
Exactly. So nowadays, even if you try to do a time zone conversion, it's a hassle.
Yeah.
But it's a sort of problem elsewhere.
Yeah, we had to like code a logarithmic function in Solidity, right? And I mean, we're not the first developers to need to calculate the log
Logs,
of something.
yeah.
Yeah. We should have, if you like coding normally, you just import that from a library, right? Like NumPy or any other mathematical library.
Exactly.
So that's
awesome. And we know that blockchains still have some limitations, and one of the most known one is scalability.
Yeah.
And how do you think Cartesi can help to overcome this limitation?
Yeah, so scalability is a very hard problem, right?
Exactly.
And has like many different sides to it. Definitely Cartesi is tackling one of the sides.
Yeah, because you have the data side, you have the execution side. So maybe you want something that can do a lot of computation, but it's still bound to limitations of how much data you can actually share with what today we call nodes, right? So, and then if you can try to scale data, but how you are sure that it's always available to have whoever wants to process it. So.
Yeah.
And then,
especially like scaling, because it sounds easy, but it's very hard to scale without compromising on all the other characteristics that we like, right? Like we want to be decentralized, we want to be secure.
Yes,
so it's very hard to scale within that bound. But then recently, right, this new idea appeared in the blockchain community, which is rollups. And it's a very interesting concept. And it actually allows you to scale, actually allows you to separate execution from data in a way that you don't lose decentralization and you don't compromise on security. So I think Cartesi is leveraging that idea into providing a house for like high CPU intensive computations.
Yeah, definitely.
Nice. You brought the rollups scalability solution, but there are also other scalability solutions,
yes,
like Plasma and sidechains. And how do you compare the rollups, and especially in Cartesi's case, the Optimist rollups, to the other solutions?
So I guess if you think about sidechains, they are their own thing. They're basically just like Ethereum, but they always try to do some they have some insight of how to make it a little bit safer, but they are not driving their safety out of the security out of Ethereum. So it's always a big question whether or not they are really safe.
Yeah, they're separating consensus, right?
Yeah, exactly. So they have their own thing, and then you have to use bridges. Sometimes those bridges are more centralized, sometimes they are a bit decentralized, but at some point you have to trust someone to make the move between the chains. Then
and Plasma, the community was very excited about Plasma.
Yeah.
But it does have one big issue, which is the data availability issue. It's exactly what is solved on rollups. So that's why you see the major focus moving from Plasma to rollups. Is because of the data availability question, right? So yeah. So I think even Vitalik wrote a cool article recently called the rollup-centric Ethereum roadmap. So the idea is that rollups is such a powerful tech that it makes sense now to
adjust Ethereum itself to the idea of rollups. Yeah. So for instance, it's being discussed like how it makes sense to make call data cheaper. So it allows for better rollups feature, because what you do in rollups is whatever message you had, you still go to the base layer, Ethereum, but then other pieces actually react to it, do some computation depending on the solution, and at some point go back to Ethereum with the result.
Yeah, so you split, like you have the base layer, the Ethereum layer or the blockchain layer as a data layer, and you do all the computations or the execution in the rollups, right? And with this idea, Ethereum is planning a future which is more, at least better for data on the main chain, right? So they're forgetting a little bit execution. So like take sharding, for example. In the beginning, sharding was planning to shard execution and data. And now they're already talking about like, oh, let's first shard data because that's way more useful, and let's leave execution to the rollups, right?
Exactly.
So even like some cool new EIPs coming, the Ethereum approval proposal, that are directly targeted to rollups.
To rollups, exactly.
Yeah, so we're very excited about that.
Yeah, I'd like to better understand the main difference in rollups. When you talk about rollups, you have zero knowledge and optimistic rollups.
Yeah.
And I know that Cartesi has decided to double down on optimistic rollups, and I'd like to hear a perspective on that.
Yeah.
So I'd say, so for instance, the ZK rollups, the idea is you have a way to protect your computation in a sense that you can always prove what is the end state, but with that it means that you're always proving step by step. You add more computation to what you're doing, making harder to scale with more complex solutions or more complex necessities. But the good thing is for small things, you can actually scale a lot from what Ethereum had to offer, and it's very good for several solutions. For instance, whatever needs some level of privacy. So, but like I said before, it's very difficult to use the same solution for anything. So I don't know now, but what if you had to do some derivation, integration, some calculus, very big equations? Is it possible? It is, but then if you had a different kind of solution like optimistic rollups, it's easier to build it. And then when you think about optimistic rollups, is you don't add any unnecessary computation to the main process. You only post what is the end result, and people have the chance to go through whatever you did and agree or not with what you posted. So in that way, that's why it's optimistic, right? And it makes a lot of sense for several solutions.
Yeah, I think like ZK is an awesome tech. The ZK rollups have some great properties, right? Instant finalization. They're very resistant to cheating because you can only update the state on the blockchain with what we call a validity proof.
Yes.
So you're sure that there's never going to be an invalid state on the blockchain. The optimistic rollups relies on people watching, right? So you have to have involved parties, and like you have economic incentives, so to ensure that this invalid state.
It's much more like Ethereum itself, right?
Yeah.
You have some nodes. You're supposed to be running your own nodes to verify everything that is there. So it's deriving from the same idea, I guess.
Yeah, but I feel like Cartesi chose optimistic rollups for a reason, which we just talked about, is that we want to be the house to CPU intensive computations, right? So not only we chose optimistic rollups, we also chose optimistic rollups with interactive fraud proofs. So even the way that we generate our fraud proofs, right? So this idea that Gabriel was talking about, in which you prove to the blockchain that someone was trying to do an incorrect state, right? This interactive word is there because we wanted to ensure that we would be the house to CPU intensive computations. So all our technical decisions are on that line. But
then the idea is, like, the necessity is if you weren't interactive, what it means is you have to have your proof fit inside one single block, because otherwise how would you do the whole computation to prove whether or not the result is false, right? So by doing it in an interactive fashion, you are basically boundless to what is the size of the computation. And with what we call verification game is really nice because you can always find really quickly where is the divergence between two parties, and you just execute a single instruction on a blockchain. So it's actually very cheap as well to settle a dispute.
Yeah. And this kinds of choice, like being an optimistic rollups and having interactive proofs, it's actually what allows us to have the VM we have, right? So one other thing that differentiates us from the most other rollups is that we build our own VM, right? We're not repeating the EVM on the rollup side. We have a different execution environment. So we have a RISC-V environment, which is open source, is super well designed, and it allows us to boot a Linux operating system, so which is quite expensive computationally, right? So
but it's amazing to be able to say like we built a Linux inside a blockchain. It's just something in itself, like
So like being an optimistic rollup allowed us to have this different VM, and then it allows users or developers to actually use all the decades of software and libraries and so on, and to rely on
NumPy.
Like NumPy, right? So that also goes back to the idea of allowing our developers to use software that is already there and is already battle tested, rather than having to write their own.
The whole thing from scratch.
Yeah.
And all these operational system, all these solutions, they run on the Cartesi machine, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And what language could developers use to write their smart contracts, and in which layers could they deploy their smart contracts? How would this Cartesi machine and their integrations they would work?
So the idea is that you code your smart contracts or your application for the Cartesi machine. And this Cartesi machine is a RISC-V VM. So anything that is you can compile to the RISC-V, you can use. So right now we have dApps written in Python. We have dApps written in Rust.
C++.
Yes. There's still like there's some adjustments that we're always improving on our VM, trying to extend it. So the idea is like we're trying to run Fedora in it, right? Instead of, because right now we run just a minimal Linux OS, we're trying to put Fedora into it. And once we're able to port Fedora into it, then we unlock even more of the real world of mainstream software, right? So,
but the potential
libraries and stacks for developers to use.
Yeah, the potential is boundless because we are so used to download binaries everywhere. So you don't really think about how you get your browser, right? You just download it and execute it. So what is going on is like we need to compile everything for the new architecture, but that's actually what already happens with your phone, new computers that don't use the old school processors. So it's just a matter of time to actually get everything going. But by just having Linux, you already have a lot of things that you can do. So
you get a lot for free, right?
Yeah,
a lot of things already come with
Yeah.
And usually when people code on Solidity, they probably miss some of those features that they are using on Linux.
Oh, definitely. So for instance, it's just recently that you can actually get a somewhat good debugger for Solidity, or it's just now that some tools are getting to be a little bit more mature for like helping your code better. But you have all of those things for Java, for Python.
Like reversing a string.
It's a breezy, yeah.
Don't even need to go that far, right? If you want to reverse a string, then it's like on Solidity, it's not an easy thing to do, you know?
And we have the blockchain trilemma.
Yes.
Decentralization, scalability, and security.
Yeah.
And usually people say pick two.
Yeah.
And the one least picked is decentralization.
Yeah.
And do you agree with this strong and bold affirmation? And if so, how should projects considering adjusting and moving towards decentralization if this is the correct path? But I assume this is, since we are in the blockchain space.
Yeah, so I think so like security and scalability are very like easy things to sell because they have a value in itself, right? But when you say decentralization, then people are like, why do I need decentralization?
Yeah,
right?
it's difficult to see it.
Very easy to forego. But well, at least I believe that decentralization is a must, not because it's an end in itself, but it's a necessary feature so that we can have like censorship resistance.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It's another side of security itself. Yeah, it's just that generally people think about security as in means of hacking or losing funds and things like that. True. That's why most projects speak scalability and security, because you gotta be secure. You don't want to have your users having trouble, but at the same time, scalability because it's so convenient. But decentralization is really important as a security feature for the future of the service and the users.
Yeah.
So you never know what's gonna happen in history, and that's what means to have a decentralized service, because you know that if it is really decentralized, it doesn't matter if the company is not there anymore, if the developers changed, or if the system in the world changed, the service is going to be alive there.
And that's the hard part of decentralization, right?
Exactly.
Because even if most of the decentralized projects, they have a development team which is guiding the development of that application, right? And it's very hard for you to start fully decentralized. Even as most things in life, there's a bunch of different aspects to decentralization.
Exactly.
There's like running the protocol. There's like verifying what happens in the protocol. There's the decision making on top of the protocol. Like, are you going to hire developers? Like, who's going to hire developers, right? What are you going to develop next? What's the next feature?
Prioritization.
So I think like most projects, they launch with training wheels, and that's the case of most rollups as well. But the idea is that you have to know how you're going to remove those training wheels, and you have to remove the training wheels in a way in which you don't impact the user experience a lot, right?
Yes, definitely.
And also like getting more community feedback and figuring out what users want, what developers want, and try to guide your company and your development not by what the people inside the company want, but in a community-based approach. So I really enjoyed that about most blockchain projects. Yeah.
I have the impression that this road to decentralization is a road that we have never taken before. So we are still figuring out where we should go, and eventually know that decentralization is the destination, the final destination. We are still unsure what's the best way to get there. And when you were mentioning about different kind of decentralizations, like you have the validators, you have also the decision making, and making decentralized decisions is not easy, because it's time consuming, it's complex, and should we weight everyone's opinion with the same weight?
Oh yeah.
Because you are blockchain engineers, I'm a businessman, and I don't think my opinion should weigh the same as yours if it's a decision making about blockchain design, for instance.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to balance decentralization, and there's a cost of timing and cost of making the decisions. And I honestly don't know what's the best solution yet. But I think that we should everybody discuss together and evaluate and how we improve a long time. And do you think that fully decentralization is something real that we can achieve, or this is more like a utopia?
It's difficult. I thought it was interesting what you're saying, because at the same time, all you said is something we have to question and think. Developers also need to do a better job of explaining things. So yes, maybe I have a better experience to reason the problem, but maybe I'm not the best person to actually make the decision. See, so the way of my opinion, maybe maybe it's not for me to say that it should weigh more than yours, for instance. Maybe I just need to translate it better for you, so you also have your chance to weigh into the question.
I think Ethereum is a nice example of that. So think about Bitcoin and think about Ethereum, right? So they're both decentralized projects. They're quite decentralized. Bitcoin has had a bunch of hard forks in its life. and most hard forks actually divide the community. The majority tends to follow one side, but there's always like Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin Gold and Satoshi Vision and a lot of different opinions on what's the future of Bitcoin, right? On Ethereum, there's a bunch of updates, and they're also hard forks.
Yeah.
But most of the community follows a single hard fork, so they're in line with the decisions taken by the core devs or the Ethereum Foundation, even though they're not forced to, right? They can follow another way.
Exactly. Yeah.
But just like Ethereum Classic did during the DAO hack, that's the only relevant fork of Ethereum, right? But every 6 months, I don't know the exact time, but every once in a while, Ethereum has a hard fork. It's proposed by the devs. They explain to the community what they're adding, the EIPs, right? Which everyone has a lot of, everyone can comment and suggest stuff. And it seems to be working great, right? People follow the hard fork.
Yeah.
And
definitely.
yeah. So, but I don't know what full decentralization would mean, right?
We still have to define and refine better what we mean when you say full decentralization.
Yeah, but it seems like the more you walk towards decentralization, the more you get these cool properties like community participation and security and censorship resistance, right?
Permissionlessness.
Yeah, permissionlessness. That's a hard one to say.
Yeah.
Trustless, yeah. So, talking about decentralization, we have DAOs, decentralized autonomous organization, and it's getting more and more popular, and people are now discussing DAOs on mainstream media. And we see that the most popular DAOs, they are still struggling to making decisions and to move forward. They are constantly learning, and there are many challenges for DAOs to overcome, but there are also many advantages of being DAOs. And I'd like to listen, what's your opinion about DAOs and how do you see DAOs develop in the future?
Yeah, so
I don't have strong opinions on DAOs. I just have thoughts about it. So I think just like decentralization in general, it's a good thing to move towards. It's still so difficult even to have a very good opinion on it, because we are so used to live in a society where we choose our hierarchies and we know how they work. So it's difficult to even grasp or what would be the good incentives to put in place to make people actually participate in DAOs.
Yeah.
So
I think like when blockchain started, or actually when blockchain started getting mainstream, people were acting like every problem in the world could be solved by blockchain. So you can like shove anything into the blockchain and then it's perfect, right? And I feel like the same thing is happening with DAOs now, that people think that every organization has to be a DAO. And that's not necessarily the case, but that doesn't mean that some organizations would be great as DAOs, right? That I think DAOs will have a massive place. I think they're a super interesting line of research. It's a hard governance problem. So what I think about DAOs nowadays, at least, is that it seems like they struggle with how to make decisions, right? Because most DAOs, they have like one coin, one vote. So you stake on the DAO and then you have a bigger vote on those decisions. So it's like you're just waging your financial power around. It would be interesting to have DAOs with more refined governance systems. So maybe I don't know. Some DAOs are also starting to have like delegated
or quadratic voting.
Yeah, quadratic voting, things like that, or even like a weight that you put in your vote depending on how many decisions you participated in the past,
the quality of
or
decisions,
reputation, like some things like that.
Yeah, they are work on improvements for sure.
Yeah. There's a lot of work to be done there, but it's a super interesting problem, right?
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a business background, and I've always been into and I've always studied about organizations, but centralized hierarchical organizations, and DAOs are just like the opposite of what we're used to, and also our society. So this is a very interesting innovation, and I'm eager to know what's coming.
Yeah,
and
I do feel like a DAO will see a day in which a DAO will hire a CEO for itself, and then maybe even fire the CEO later. But I don't think the DAOs will necessarily completely split from hierarchical structures, at least when it's about decision making, right?
Yeah, we saw a presentation from MakerDAO, and they have departments, they have their heads of departments, and they are making those decisions because they need to act fast and be sharp on their decisions. So eventually it's not every decision that is decentralized, and I think that it shouldn't be decentralized for every decision. Everybody shouldn't have to voice their opinion for every matter that's being decided.
Yeah.
And we are still kind of learning and understanding what would be the optimal way to making decisions in such organizations.
I feel like in that sense, like the DAOs can vote on who's gonna make the decision. You don't have to raise a vote for anything.
And you kind of do that.
Power to the
Yeah, exactly.
You kind of do that on companies today, right? You hire a person for a job, you say what needs to get done, and you trust their decision-making process to make it done. So.
Yeah, I think a DAO will actually be somewhat similar to a normal organization, but the ownership is gonna be better split up. It's gonna
Instead of shares, we're going to have tokens.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. I'd like to discuss a little bit more about this decentralization topic, because like 10 years ago, Satoshi Nakamoto published his first paper, and the first use case for blockchain was finance.
Yeah.
And today you have decentralized finance, and it's getting massive adoption, and even with the high fees that we have nowadays on blockchain, finance is still a very good use case, because although people are paying eventually $50 for a transfer, it still can make sense in the blockchain world. Although in real life, you wouldn't be very happy paying $50 for a wire. And I'd like to listen about your perspective on this first use case. What's the importance of blockchain and peer-to-peer transfers? What do you think about it?
How to say? So it's interesting what you said about a $50 transfer, for instance. The thing is, I know how technology evolved to a certain degree that we take a lot of things for granted. But if you think backwards and think if you are in the middle of nowhere and you need to have access to some means of transferring money, you will need to have a bank agency there, people working, you have to maintain the whole structure there. And with this technology, there's nobody actually responsible for it. And somehow you can still do the same thing. So the whole infrastructure there is for banks, you are paying it somewhere, somehow, And although I'm not really saying that we should have $50 transfers, I'm not saying that's what we want for the future. It's just that that's what we have today because of the way things work, and they are kind of justified in a sense, because you are definitely way more secure with this than you were before. And in countries like ours, we are Brazilians, and we see a lot of our neighbors. We know that regimes change and monetary policies change suddenly as well, and you lose the trust for the currency, and suddenly your life is upside down. And yes, sometimes you're gonna be paying $50 to get bread. It's terrible, but at the same time, that the thing is gonna be there. It's insured.
I don't think it's worth it to act as if $50 is the fee you're actually gonna pay, right? $50 for me at least is a symptom of the disease, of the lack of scalability, right?
Lack of scalability, it's not final.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's like the infrastructure we had before, like when bank agencies were actually needed.
Yeah, but like I don't think $50 would, like, if the fees stayed at $50, I don't think the tech would be pervasive. Because I think one of the cool things about DeFi is that you can actually connect a lot of people that are not connected to the financial system, right? Of the financial world.
Unbanked people.
Bank the unbanks, right?
Yeah.
And also you internationalize. I'm not sure if that's a word, but you allow people from all over the world to participate in financial systems
Yeah, exactly.
all over the world as well, right?
Yeah.
And that's
You
super
can get
interesting.
loans that previously you couldn't,
Yeah.
for instance.
But
And like
my
a flash
concern
loan.
is, can we bank the unbanked if you are charging such high fees?
So, I mean,
I don't think you can. Yeah.
but
So that's why it's so important to have scalability solutions in place.
Yeah.
True.
And there's another symptom of, not symptom, but consequence of the high fees as well, which makes me particularly sad, is that when we started talking about blockchain, we saw a bunch of different uses for it, right? It's like use cases. How you can do games, you can do governance, you can do
IoT,
a lot of things. Yeah, IoT, yeah, exactly.
smart cities,
A whole
usability.
range of things. But the only type of application that can actually afford to pay the fees is like DeFi applications,
DeFi,
right? Because
yeah.
they deal with assets directly. So it's like a gentrification of the blockchain. So that's
only for whales also.
exactly yeah.
But that's the thing, though. Although we could argue the whole day whether or not Bitcoin can evolve into something like Ethereum, right now it's just for simple transfers, and things like Lightning are already working in places that actually people need them. So they are actually being banked somehow. They are just not having access to more complex financial products. So like, if they need a loan, then yes, they would need to go back to Ethereum. But we can envision a future of what happened to Bitcoin happening to Ethereum as well.
Yeah. My only fear is that people are gonna keep chasing the high yields. You know, I think that's we run the risk of transforming DeFi into a big casino. And forgetting the actual uses of DeFi, of connecting people, financially connecting people, and you being able to not be that affected by the political situation in your country. You being able to move around or send money to your family, right? So I think that's
I have the impression that protocols nowadays, they are very worried and concerned in attracting resources and attracting value to their ecosystem and smart contracts.
Yes.
And we have a very popular metric called TVL, total volume value locked, and this is a metric that only measures the success of the DeFi applications that you have on your protocol.
Definitely.
And we've been discussing about this recently, and eventually this is not the best metric.
Yeah.
And I'd like to hear your concerns about the industry using this metric to measure success of protocols.
Yeah. So developer, as you said, is super biased towards DeFi, right? Because you can have a game that has 1 billion daily users, and maybe the
transfers are so small that it doesn't amount to too much.
But that's
there's
still a big
adoption,
project, And not only that, I think if we could, and that's a harder metric to look at, but actually looking at the use of the money locked, right? Because it doesn't matter if it's you have a lot of locked value, but you only have that value there because you're chasing unsustainable yields, right? And as soon as you stop minting new tokens or your yield goes down, then that money leaves and goes elsewhere to the next highest yield, right? So
I think the industry is too young, so we're developing new metrics all the time. So that is some kind of turnover, for instance. I'm guessing someone out there is actually looking at this, and with time, I guess we will develop those new tools, and people will start looking for different numbers, actually.
Different metrics, right?
Yeah, because just the total value was not something that we had just, 2 years ago. I'm not sure on the timing, but it's something that really came forward with DeFi, because at some point a DeFi application just popped up everybody's attention and it became something relevant. But as other projects become relevant in different industries, so to speak, then I guess they would need different metrics, and I guess that would happen naturally.
Yeah, DeFi definitely is the most famous use case. It was the first use case, and considering gas fees, especially on Ethereum, it's the use case that we see as being the most applicable to
The use case that can afford the blockchain, right?
Yeah, that's true. Nevertheless, and we have many other very interesting use cases, and we can list them like IoT, gaming, and NFTs, and sustainability, and digital identity, and crypto cities, smart cities.
Yeah.
And how do you see Cartesi helping developers and helping society to bridge developers and users to the blockchain, and using and being a resource and being an infrastructure for people to deploy all these different blockchain solutions?
Yes.
I see it as a tool. It has its own properties and it can be very, very useful for certain type of problems. I feel within Cartesi, naturally, developers are always like talking to each other. Hey, we can actually use this for this and this and that. And I just did with Felipe a few days ago, talking about how we could build a Oracle-like behavior inside a chain for a very complex computations, right?
Yeah.
And that is something that is actually necessary in many types of applications. So it's really difficult to just close down into a few examples, but as people start thinking about blockchain, and at any given moment they think, oh, but then it's going to be so expensive to do that on Ethereum, or maybe the contract for that would be so huge or complex, or we would need several parts for it, or even it would be difficult to evaluate the correctness of the contract, because I don't know, now the system has 25, 30 contracts. Then it starts to become more and more like traditional software. So you could definitely leverage Cartesi environment to build that more traditional software in a traditional way and then port it to blockchain.
Yeah, there's that idea that I like a lot, which is the idea of extending the number of operations you can do without thinking about them, right? So right now, if you go and code a dApp for a blockchain, you'll have to think on each small decision and each like you have to code the logarithmic function, and you have to reinvent the wheel somehow, right? I think Cartesi helps people to use all this massive amount of software has been software and infrastructure that has been built in the past, and that allows people to port their ideas in a way in which they can just like focus on their ideas, and they don't have to focus on rebuilding all the tiny abstractions that made their idea possible, right? So I think there's two parts to this. One of them is moving existing stuff to the blockchain. So there's a lot of things that already exist as business models, as applications, and they would benefit a lot from the blockchain. And for that, Cartesi helps immensely, right? Because these things usually run on normal operating
centralized
systems. Exactly.
Kind of paradigm. Yeah.
And there's also the idea that blockchain, being this different paradigm, also allows people to create things that were not possible before, and therefore do not exist right now.
Yeah.
And I think since Cartesi allows users to work on this higher level of abstraction, it makes more likely for people to like innovate not on the code itself, right? Don't worry so much about.
So for instance, we're just talking about governance. DAOs, in a sense, talks about governance. You could have a very strict set of contracts to define very security related stuff on Ethereum, and you can have a much larger complex structure of decision making process inside the Cartesi machine, and it could be easier to develop, evolve it, and even upgrade it, and that wouldn't need to be all the time changing how things are inside Ethereum. And it actually is easier because we already use those softwares to run big companies. So it's even though that example necessarily is not impossible to do in Ethereum, it would be way harder to do it.
Awesome. And devs can rest assured, because Cartesi is a multi-chain or chain agnostic.
Yeah.
So at the moment we are deployed on Ethereum. We're integrated to Ethereum, also Avalanche and BNB chain, formerly known as BSC chain. And there we envision the world where Cartesi is going to be integrated to major layer 1 chains. And on this take, although Cartesi is playing on the safe side, what would be your guess for the future of blockchain? Do you think that there will be a monopoly or an oligopoly or multiple chains? How do you see this?
It's a controversial opinion.
Yeah,
Or a
it's
controversial
complicated.
question, yeah. Well, my guess is one base layer. I think one base layer is going to have the majority, just a guess by the way,
Sure.
Yeah, don't hold me accountable. But I feel like one base layer, because global consensus is a very expensive resource. And then you'll have a lot of layer 2 applications, like application specific layer 2s. So CPU intensive, or rather dApps that need CPU intensive computations are going to come to Cartesi.
Or just pieces of it.
Or just pieces of it, right?
Yeah.
But maybe a dApp that has a lot of like simple transactions, maybe that's better on a ZK rollup.
But in this scenario, we would need very good interoperability and bridges.
Yes, composability is a major challenge.
Yeah.
It is.
But we're still a bit far from that.
There's like two types of composability, right? There's composability intra rollup, so
like stacking kind of thing, right?
Yeah. So there's composability between like a rollup and the base layer, or between two different rollups, or two applications inside the same rollup. So that's a major challenge on the industry. But the good thing is that there's a lot of intelligent people working on this problem, right? And some good solutions are coming out, and I'm a believer. I think we'll have something pretty cool pretty soon.
Nice. How would you invite fellow developers colleague to know Cartesi and to join the blockchain space? What would be the first steps that you would recommend them?
I mean, I have a bunch of friends who are developers. We kind of have this show me the code kind of culture. So I would definitely show them the Rollups examples repository that we have. We have a bunch of cool, simple projects displaying how to get started and how to run things.
Our docs are quite good as well. I like our docs.
But my friends are more like, let's go and play with it.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, you can do anything, right? Like if you you're interested in the tech, maybe the Discord.
Yeah.
Just to have a chat. If you're a hardcore developer, maybe you can just read the code on GitHub.
Yes.
But I think that's a bit intimidating. There's a lot of code there.
Too much code.
Yeah. But I feel like the docs, I think that should be our portal to developers. I feel like it's already quite beautiful. It's always improving. I think that's I would start by the docs. I'm not sure about you, but I would start by the docs.
I like the code, man. I like changing stuff, breaking it.
Options for all different kind of flavors and people. So
yeah, for sure.
Welcome.